And broadcasting live direct from our studios in central Moscow, this is RT. Glad to have you with us. Let's get right to our top story. A global outcry against corporate greed has risen up in almost 1,000 cities worldwide. People have taken their anger to the streets, saying their governments have been taken over by big business. The Occupy Wall Street movement began in New York, quickly spreading across the U.S. to Los Angeles, Denver, and Washington, among others. It has since gone global, with Asia joining in the demands for change. In Europe, too, hundreds of cities are taking part in the protests. We will be hearing from our correspondents around the world, but first we're going to go back to New York and Times Square, where a huge police presence, including anti-terrorism units, have been deployed as almost New Year's Eve-sized crowds have gathered. RT's Lucy Kafanoff is there for us now.
Very tense here, Sean. We are still on 46th and 7th, where we were before. The police had barricaded the area, preventing everyone from going or moving. It's almost impossible to get out. Thousands here in Times Square. Just moments ago, I saw two protesters who were peacefully sitting down, arrested by the police, dragged away. They threw them down on the floor, face down, cuffed them, and took them away in NYPD paddy wagons. As you mentioned earlier, there are riot police here. There are counterterrorism police officers here, which is quite confusing for the crowd. It's mostly a peaceful crowd of families and young protesters, some elderly folks here as well. Again, as I mentioned before, thousands in the square. Very, very confusing, unclear where we can go or when we'll be able to get out. The police officers here are extremely tense. One officer actually shoved me aside. I showed him my press stuff. He said, "I don't recognize that." Apparently, if you don't have a NYPD-issued press stuff, you're not allowed to protect yourself as a member of the press. It's very, very unclear as to how or when we'll be able to leave here. There's actually several dozen police officers on horseback blocking the way right now. The crowd seems very confused, very tense. They're chanting shame, shame, shame at the police officers who had just arrested the peaceful protesters. It's also unclear what's going on down lower below me in Times Square. We actually marched up here with several hundred protesters, possibly over 1,000 protesters from Washington Square Park, a peaceful march. Once we got to Times Square to 42nd Street, the police officers rolled out the orange netting that prevented us from turning. They sort of funneled us over to 46th Street and kept us barricaded here. So I'm not quite sure what's going on down there, but it seems that the situation is very tense as well. We also saw a group of protesters reading in unison the First Amendment to the police officers to, again, refuse to give ground. We're still trapped here, still very unclear how the situation is going to unfold. Aside from the arrest, the crowd does seem mostly peaceful, but very, very tense, very nervous.
RT's Lucy Kafanoff reporting for us there in Times Square. Now, you heard her mention about the police. The latest reports say at least 70 people have been arrested after scuffles broke out with the police. And we have more details on what's happening on Times Square now from our correspondent, Marina Portnaya.
What sparked the tension was probably the fact that the NYPD, the New York City Police Department, was overwhelmed with the unprecedented amount of people that turned out in support of this Occupy movement. I don't think even journalists were prepared for a crowd this large. The sidewalks were packed, everybody standing shoulder to shoulder. There were also helicopters flying in the air overhead above the crowd. This was a crowd that, while I was there, was protesting peacefully. There were police officers telling some protesters, if you leave now, you won't get hurt. One Italian journalist had his press pass confiscated by the police officers because he, for failing to remain on the sidewalk. We did see some paddy wagons come in. We did see some riot police. Before the environment got as tense as it has, I did get an opportunity to speak with many people in the crowd.
I think this sends a very powerful message. I think it sends a message that this movement is going to continue, that people are just going to keep joining, and it's going to keep building until we can come to some constructive working solutions.
It's time for people to get what we need, we are the government. Without our money, without our hard-earned money, there is no country, there is no government. We just work and we give it back.
It's not quite clear why the amount of police officers and counterterrorism units have turned out in Times Square and are trying to break apart this demonstration. But what is clear is that these activists remain, while I was there, to stand their ground, and hopefully this will all end in a non-violent way. But of course, the amount of police presence that is turning out in Times Square is clearly creating a very tense environment.
Of course, we will keep you updated on the events in New York. But now over to Europe. Here's a roundup from our correspondents covering events there.
Well, people are showing absolutely no sign of tiredness. There's still, I would say, a couple of thousand camped out here in the central square of Madrid and Puerta del Sol. And as we have said before, it looks like Occupy Wall Street movement has inspired thousands of people across the globe. Well, there are some who believe that it all started right here in Madrid in the middle of May, when thousands of people have gathered for protests against the government's austerity measures, because, as you may have heard, Spain is going through some incredibly hard financial times. And they have been protesting for the last several months, on and off. In fact, they have camped out here in the square for a month and a half just this summer. And these people here believe that they're actually making a change, that their voices are being heard. Let's have a listen to what those activists from the 15M movement had to say about their cause.
Of course, global utopia isn't possible. Changes take time. But we want those who are at the top to understand that common people want change and how much we want it.
I was jobless several months ago. Many of my friends are out of work and the situation is rather difficult. If we do nothing, nothing will change. We want a transparent, horizontal society. We saw the Arab Spring, then the Spanish summer, the American autumn, and now we'll face a global winter.
They look like quite a hefty goal for these people here, but you have to understand, for them it's not just a matter of corporate domination. For them it's a matter literally of surviving. A lot of them have invested money and time into education. We're talking about people who are 24 to 35 years old. They're basically, they are the people who should be moving forward, but they cannot afford they cannot get a job, and therefore they cannot afford to get homes, they cannot afford to start families. So for them, really, it's a very significant issue. So they are determined to make their voices heard. And of course, their concerns are being voiced all over Europe, and RT has correspondents in other cities as well. Let's get now the latest from our correspondents Daniel Bushel and Ivor Bennett, who are in Brussels and London. They will bring us the latest of what's happening in European countries.
Crowds, despite the cold, is getting bigger and is getting angrier, shouting slogans against the banks and the governments which keep rescuing them with public money. Authorities first tried to ban this grouping, saying there was no running water for them, which many saw as an excuse to stop them getting together. But they have finally given in to the weight of numbers, and they now plan an all-night alternative parliament, what they're calling, which is for the people, in the interests of the people, and not the financial elite. Now, the latest scandal is Dexia, one of Belgium's largest lenders, which has been bailed out just now by the government to the tune estimated of costing €5,000 per taxpayer, alongside the CEO of that bank being promised for last year a bonus of €600,000 in practice for practically leading the bank to the brink of collapse. Now, the people have also been shocked by the EU's reaction. When he was asked about the significance of the protest, a spokesperson for the European Commission just answered, "What does it mean to us?" The EU Employment Commissioner joked the protesters should go to Frankfurt instead of Brussels, Frankfurt being the home of the European Central Bank, central to this euro crisis at the moment. It's an international movement. People are coming here from all across Europe. People have actually marched for months by foot, for example, from the likes of Spain to get here, seeing Brussels really as the heart of the EU and the problem here.
Well, for the large part, the protests today have been very peaceful, but the atmosphere here has just suddenly, in the last few moments, got a lot more tense. That's because the police, which are still in vast numbers here, and you can see the line of police vans behind me, the protesters are gathered behind there. The police have been trying to disperse the last few remaining 100 hardcore protesters from the steps in front of the cathedral. They say they're trying to disperse them peacefully. They set up a cordon around them. They're not letting anyone into that cordon, but they're wanting people to leave. But But as they started to disperse those people on the pavement, the protesters, they didn't want to move. They say they have a right to remain on the sidewalk there and to carry out their protest peacefully. When they didn't move, the actions did escalate. There was a lot of pushing and shoving. Arrests were made. I think you can see some of those pictures now. A lot of shouting. Police have brought out dogs as well. And as the crowd chanted "Shame on you" to the police, the atmosphere got a lot more tense. Now, I'm not quite sure what's going to happen now, because what the police want to do is disperse these protesters, because they say this is private property and they have no right to remain here. Now, as for the protesters, earlier today there were reports of almost 3,000 people being present here. There were certainly well over 1,000. Talking to them in terms of an end goal, they're kind of, that's a little bit disorganised, but talking to them you soon realise that's not really the point. The point of why they're here today is because it's just to register their anger, and that's really what's galvanising all of them. Anger that their money, taxpayers' money, is continuing to be spent on bailing out banks. They're angry that the people in charge of those banks are still getting bonuses, and they see that as the architects of the economic disaster as being rewarded. And they're also just generally angry at the way the country's being run. And the phrase that's being continuously used today in terms of a slogan for today's action is "We are the 99%. They say that they make up the vast majority of this country, yet they have no control of how the country is being run. So they say this is their chance to strike back, and this is what some of them had to say.
I've bought sleeping apparatus. I've bought tents and sleeping bags. So, you know, as long as I can secure food, then a longer stay as possible.
The slogan that began on Wall Street, "We are the 99%, echoes in Britain as well, because we know that the bankers and the bosses are getting bailed out by the government, and we're being forced to pay the price for that.
Speaking to people, it is really amazing that you really get a sense that they think they're really beginning to have a say here, and something will really change now. So they're really digging in their heels. There's people with stoves, tents. They're setting up camp here. They're aware they might not be able to spend the night here, but they're prepared to go somewhere else, because they really think this is the start of something that could change something similar to the Occupy Wall Street, as we've heard from Marina Portnaya in New York, and they're prepared to stay for as long as it takes until they have their voice heard.
RT's Ivor Bennett, Daniel Bushell, and Irina Galushka, they're reporting for us from Europe. Staying in Europe, Rome also witnessed Occupy Wall Street movement protests turning violent as tens of thousands of people took to the streets of the Italian capital, venting their fury against corporate greed. Demonstrators smashed shop windows and torched cars before being dispersed by police using tear gas and water cannon. Plumes of smoke were seen billowing near the Colosseum and other parts of the city. Some museums were also forced to close down, and at least one theater canceled a show. Maurizio Torrealta, a journalist and presenter, says a more radical element has hijacked the protest.
There were two demonstrations. One huge demonstration of 100,000 people. It was exactly the same like in Madrid, the indignados, people with no future, but educated people with a university degree, with no hope, no chance, and that was the majority of the people. Then there was another demonstration, the 500 of so-called black blocs. They were in the beginning of the demonstration, and they started to attack police. And police reacted very mildly, because they use tear gas, smoke bombs, but not really maybe water cannons, nightstick. But really, the reaction of the police was very, very calm, not exaggerated.
And taking a look now at other protests worldwide as we see how far the demonstrations have spread. Protesters gathered in Berlin, sparking clashes between police and demonstrators after they tried to break through security barriers surrounding the parliament. In Athens, thousands rallied around the parliament, raging against the bankers, financiers, and politicians they accuse of ruining their economy and condemning millions to poverty. People have also taken to the streets in Tokyo, protesting against big business and income inequality, as well as expressing anger at nuclear power companies. And Taiwan's capital, Taipei, also played host to an Occupy movement. Many rallied outside the city's financial tower, which they viewed as a symbol of corporate excess. The echoes of this global movement have also been heard in the Middle East. RT's Paula Sleer is in Israel and witnessed the demonstrations in Tel Aviv.
Hundreds of people are also gathering here in Tel Aviv, where many of the faces are familiar as the organizers of the social protest movement that has been taking place across this country for several months now have given their full weight and backing to this global movement. In fact, as you can see, there are hundreds of people here. They've mobilized themselves once again online. At the moment, they're holding small discussion groups talking about issues such as tackling poverty, being part of this international movement. And when you talk to people here, they say that while it's a pity that they're not really actively participating in these Wall Street protests, they certainly support them, and the protests and the demonstrations here in Israel will continue to grow until the government meets their demands.
I think that we need to continue and have some demonstration, either big events like this one or smaller events, but we need to keep in the mind of the people to know that we still don't have any solution. We still don't have anything from the government that's a specific and proper solution for the situation. We are all into it.
The slogan Occupy Wall Street here in Israel has been translated into Occupy Rothschild Boulevard. Rothschild Boulevard being the street where for nearly 3 months protesters pitched tents in defiance against this country's socio-economic policies. Earlier this month, those tents did come down after an extended court battle between the Tel Aviv municipality and the demonstrators. So certainly here in Israel, we're witnessing people very much part of this global movement. You need to remember that the last few months have seen the largest demonstrations in this country's 63-year-old history, with nearly 1 million people taking to the streets. Paula Sleer, RT, Tel Aviv.
And you can keep up to date minute by minute with our correspondents covering the protests on their Twitter feeds. This is the latest from Lucy Kafanov, who we heard earlier live from New York. She's reporting on what's happening on the ground, including how the crowd is being kettled behind railings, with one officer even telling the crowd that if they don't clear the area, then someone is going to get hurt. On to other news this hour, with over 3,000 people killed in Syria since